Hi, I'm Mary Wong, Chinese medicine practitioner and acupuncturist, founder of Alive Holistic Health, and author of the book Pathways to Pregnancy. Welcome to my post number 74, and where tonight I'm going to be talking to you about, do you really need PGS, which is pre-implantation genetic screening when you do an IVF cycle? So here's the thing about IVF. There's more and more options out there when you do it. So I call them add-ons. So you have the ability to do some chromosomal genetic testing, PGS. You can do ICSI, which is injecting the sperm into the egg. Oh, let's back off. So when you're considering IVF, those of you that are in the place of never having done it, or even for those of you who have done it, over time, what happens is there are different things that doctors offer. It's like first, second time, if it doesn't work out this way, then let's do something else, or let's add on something else. So one of these add-ons now, which has become quite routine, is called genetic testing. And it's now it's called PGS, pre-implantation genetic screening. And so I do get people asking me this. Now, I'm not a geneticist. I'm not an embryologist or a fertility doctor, but I get enough of these. So I wanted to delve deep into, well, how can I support women and couples going through this in a very unbiased way? Because guess what? I have nothing to gain from this, right? Because it's fertility clinics that offer this. I do not. And so I wanted to learn more about it. And I had the ability to go to the Canadian Fertility Andrology Society Gatekeepers Dilemma workshop, which occurred 2 Fridays ago. And I was the only Chinese medicine practitioner, I'll have to tell you, in that whole room amongst geneticists, embryologists, staff from fertility clinics, reproductive endocrinologists, meaning fertility doctors, ethicists, counselors. So it was pretty cool to share space with them and hear what they have to say about PGS testing. And here specifically, we're going to talk about mosaicism. So first of all, what the heck is PGS testing anyway, right? So the idea is when you're doing an IVF cycle, you want to increase the number of eggs that you would naturally have at ovulation. So at ovulation, without any kind of intervention, you basically drop 1 egg. However, when you use stimulation drugs to do IVF, what they want to do is try to give you hormones to grow multiple eggs, follicles. And so with that, when they retrieve them out of the body, then potentially if you have, let's say, I'll just give it a number, 10. If you get 10 eggs, they want to fertilize them. And when you fertilize them, there's going to be an attrition rate. And now when they do this genetic testing, if you have 10 embryos and you want to do a transfer, well, which one do you want to put back in? Because guess what? Not all of them will be a baby. So the theory is that when you do the genetic testing and look for chromosomal abnormalities, then you're not going to put those ones in. You're going to leave them aside, cast them aside, so that you put back in those ones that are genetically normal. Makes sense, right? It sounds simple. However, going to this workshop, I found it quite insightful. So the very first speaker that spoke was Dr. Cooper, and he's from Cooper Genomics. Oh, sorry, Dr. Tony Gordon. He is a clinical cytogeneticist, meaning he does genetics on the actual cells. And he works with this company called Cooper Genomics. And what he said was interesting. Now, few posts back, I interviewed Dr. Gleicher, and that's my post number 68, by the way. And I was talking to him about PGS testing because at his clinic, he has had live births when there was chromosomal abnormalities with the PGS testing. Like, so for example, if a 45-year-old goes and gets genetic testing on her embryos and it came back that none of them were normal, these guys have successfully put back what I thought was completely abnormal embryos, and they became a live, healthy baby to term. What I have then discovered since is that what they transfer is not the 100% abnormal. They actually transferred back the ones that are considered mosaic. So what is mosaic? Well, let's begin by saying, what do they do for genetic testing? So genetic testing, you have a blastocyst, which is multi-celled, many-cell embryo, and that's a day 5 embryo. And they biopsy some cells. So it could be 4, 5, 6 cells. And then they go and take them apart. So there's the biopsy of the cell, and then they freeze the embryo. And to test if this is a viable embryo. And when they test it, what they have found was sometimes it's every cell that they have taken out is considered abnormal, meaning that there is an actual genetic anomaly issues, right? And then what they have found was a percentage of those tested embryos aren't necessarily every cell are abnormal. In some cases, let's say they take out 5. We're just going to say 5. Okay, so they take out 5 cells. They take out the biopsy of 5 cells, and they test each cell, and perhaps 3 are normal, and 2 of the cells are abnormal. Does that make sense? Or it could be 2 cells are normal, or it could be 1 cell is normal, or it could be 4 cells are normal. And either way, there's a certain level of cells or percentage of cells that are abnormal. So that is a mosaic embryo. And so some clinics, it's like, what do we do with a mosaic embryo? Well, that is the embryo that Dr. Gleicher has been using, and also cases in Italy, where I think in the total there was like 18 documented. I forget the exact number, but I can get back to you with that number if you really need. But the point is, there are live births, healthy babies to term, and that's not completely the abnormal embryos. It's actually called the mosaic embryos. So again, I'll give you the definition of what a mosaic embryo is, if I find it. Da, 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 da. Oh, gee, why did I not write it down? Anyway, basically that the cells, some of them are good, some of them are bad, meaning bad means there's a genetic anomalies, right? So that's mosaic embryo. So the question is now for ethicists and even fertility doctors, do we really want to put back an embryo that has some issues? Like, can it correct itself? Because Dr. Gleicher says, yes, it can absolutely correct itself. Well, then came Dr. Casper from Trio Fertility, who's also a leading researcher, a progressive researcher out of Trio in Toronto. And when he talked about it, he saw that self-correction does occur in these embryos, but no one has put back embryos that look 100% abnormal, meaning that all 4 cells or all 5 cells that were biopsied were abnormal. So then, what do you do with the mosaics? He says that there is a level of self-correction through apoptosis, which means that there is a natural cellular death which occurs in a normal part of an organism. It's kind of like helping one survive, right? So it gets rid of the bad ones. So he's saying that self-correction does occur, but it occurs at the level of blastocyst just before it's hatching, just before it starts to break out and wants to implant in the uterus. So I think that's fascinating, because even during the blastocyst stage, It's like early blastocyst, and then there's late blastocyst. So if you take a biopsy out of the very early formed blastocyst stage, and you get a certain amount of mosaicism, maybe before it hatches, it can actually start creating that cellular death on those that were bad and correct itself to become a good embryo. So then really what you want to ask your doctors if you're contemplating on doing PGS or not is, number one, what kind of PGS testing are they doing? So there's different techniques. So about 5 years ago, they did a FISH technique, which was using day 3 embryos. Well, nobody does that anymore. It's not very accurate. Now, the most accurate, and perhaps by the time someone watches this post 2 years from now, this technology might be outdated. But right now, this is the most up-to-date genetic testing screening that we have. And it's called the new generation sequencing. So I invite you to ask whoever your fertility doctor is about NGS, if that's the kind of genetic testing that they're doing. Typically, it should be. And the reason being that this is better is because they do independent snippets to show the meiotic errors, meaning meiosis is when you have one cell and there's a cellular division. So normally in all of your body parts, you have cells and they're called diploids. So there's 2 sets of chromosomes. But when you create an egg, they have to divide so that you're only left with 1 set of chromosome, because it has to meet up with the sperm. And once the sperm and egg joins up, then you have a whole set again, right? So an embryo starts off as 1 cell, and then it goes to 1st division, 2nd division, 3rd division, 4th division, 5th division, etc., to become this multi-organism. So by the time you hit blastocyst stage, it's definitely a multi-celled organism. And so if there is genetic issues through the cellular division, depending on where it happens, there's different levels of mosaicism. So if it happens at the 5th level of cellular division, perhaps it has a chance of becoming a normal embryo through apoptosis, what we talked about earlier in the cellular death. But again, that's more at the early stage of blastocyst. I hope I'm not losing you. If I am, you can question me again and PM me or post on the comment, okay? So the point is, this new kind of testing is more sensitive to the kinds of chromosomal errors. Now, in the past, what they found was when they take a cell, okay, so this is a blastocyst and it's multi-celled. Well, there's multi-cells around the outside, the trophectoderm, and that trophectoderm, by the way, becomes the placenta. And the inside is the inner cell mass, and that becomes the baby. So currently, they're only touching the placenta. So, you know, how accurate is it really? I think it can be helpful, especially in those that have tangible genetic issues, such as what we call the balanced translocation. And typically, it's a very uncommon, rare issue. And if you have it, you would be testing for it. And it's maybe 5% of the human population. So if there's question, you know, get tested anyway. But otherwise, for a normal human being, there are chances of meiotic errors, right? So that does happen. Point is, do we really want to check genetic testing if it's inaccurate, right? So in the olden days, when they were not doing the next generation sequencing, what happened was you can take a snippet on one side of the cell or a snippet on the other side of the cell, and you take it to 2 labs and you get them tested. What happens is that, lo and behold, one lab has a different result than the other lab because of the cellular division bit. So then you're left with, how accurate really is it? So we say, do the genetic testing, NGS, and do it at the just before hatching stage where you get a better glimpse of what's going on. And this is at a time when the self-correction is at its end. Does that make sense? Okay, so did I miss something? So I'm actually going through my notes, by the way, because I can't remember everything. It was a really awesome workshop. Oh, yes, very, very important. Trio then decided to take the statistics in their own lab. So looking at chromosomally tested, meaning PGS tested embryos that were found normal, where they put it back into the human body, versus non-tested embryos. So when I was going through IVF, PGS was really not around. So we did it blindly. So they were not tested at all, right? So I would just go transfer after transfer. And I had some that just caused no pregnancies at all. I had two that caused, I had one that caused a pregnancy, but then I miscarried. And then there was one that was a chemical pregnancy, meaning that you had a positive pregnancy, beta, positive HCG, and then slowly it went down. So there's no development. And then I had Zoe, my baby, most importantly. But the point is, I didn't do any genetic testing. So here, they're talking about people who have, and there's smaller numbers. So they're looking at non-tested, 681 non-tested embryos that were put back in people versus the chromosomally normal, which was 164. And what happened was when they looked at the cross comparison between the tested and the non-tested, the implantation rates were really close. 52% for the chromosomally normally tested one versus 47.5% for the non-tested. And then in terms of live births, which is even more important, the statistics around that, well, there's slightly more of a higher percentage. So when it came to the chromosomally normal PGS tested, 46.2% was successful live births. So notice it's not 100%, right? And then the non-tested, it was 42.1%. So here there's a slight difference. I'm looking at, let's see, 4.1% increase in live births. So you do the math. You can potentially get 4.1% higher chance of having a baby from doing genetic testing. 4%. It's $5,000. Is it worth it? I'm not 100% sure if I'm convinced, right? And I'm not making this up. I'm not being biased here, one way or another. So do you really want to do PGS testing when it only gives you 4% chance extra of having a take-home baby? So what I see with this, though, for all of you watching, is that when you do PGS testing, see, notice how there's no figure that says 100%. There is no such thing. But what you hear is implantation rate maybe a tiny bit higher compared to a non-tested one, from like a 52% chance of pregnancy. I don't know. And that's what I see. Like, and I'll say this again. Typically, when we do more intervention, more technology, more money paid, there is higher expectation. You can't help it. It's like, okay, this has to do it because I'm adding on technology. I'm adding in this chromosomal testing. It's for sure this is going to work, right? Because it is chromosomally normal. Well, unfortunately, and I've seen this, and we've seen this at the office again and again, it doesn't guarantee you that it's a baby. And, you know, it's very easy to think when you have a negative pregnancy test after you've transferred back into your body a chromosomally normal embryo and think, well, this is a baby. Well, guess what? We can't figure nature out 100%. We can mess around with nature, but nature still is, they've got us, right? We can't control it. So sometimes these embryos, even though they look normal, they're chromosomally normal, they look beautiful on camera, or in the microscope, under the microscope, they're not necessarily babies. So I'm sorry to tell you this. Like, I wish that I could tell you that, when you test a chromosomally normal embryo, it's going to guarantee you a baby. There are no guarantees. It may increase your odds a little bit, but from the stats here, it doesn't show to me that it's the best way. Now, I did mention earlier that perhaps for someone that has actual genetic issues that they know about through lineage, maybe in that case, that's a little better. Especially with the technology that it is right now, it's a little more accurate and done at the hatching stage. So if you're going to do it at the hatching stage of blastocyst. And for those of you that have had miscarriages, sometimes, and I thought of this myself, I thought, oh, wow, this will be a really great way, because surely these guys, when they have lots of multiple miscarriages, surely there's got to be a genetic component, because as Dr. Shaheen mentioned, 85% of miscarriages is due to chromosomal abnormalities. So in those cases, you would figure that that will increase your odds. And what I walk away with looking at this, again, it's like, maybe a tiny bit, but it really doesn't solve the issue either. And in fact, I had a conversation with a patient who had a baby, a couple of months back, but she still comes in to see me for other things. And she had 5 or 6 miscarriages before she came and saw me. And when we looked at her statistics of the IVF she's done, of the genetic testing that she's done, she transferred embryos where they were all genetically normal. She was left with a certain amount of normals. I just can't think of the numbers offhand. But when she transferred them back, there was a couple where she didn't get pregnant at all. And there was a couple that was turned into a pregnancy, but then she miscarried. And then the last one, when she finally started acupuncture to the mix and then increasing the blood volume, just in fear of, any kind of autoimmune response, in fear of, lack of blood flow there. Well, that one, but because don't forget, they were all chromosomally normal, but this one actually became the baby. So not sure if it was the PGS, right? Really, because they were all looking normal. So now looking at, for the future for her, she's like, if I want a second child one day, I don't know if genetic testing is for me, right? Because she already had miscarriages on her own, so she knew she could get pregnant. The IVF really didn't help her, and IVF with genetic testing also didn't help her. So I found that very fascinating. Food for thought. I don't have answers, and you know what? You have to also, I can't make any judgments, or I can't decide for you. So I'm just laying down some of these kinds of facts, and you get to choose powerfully. And sometimes it can be a little confusing. So hopefully you won't get too confused by this. And again, if you have questions, you can always reach out and email me, do an instant message. You can contact me at clinic@aliveholistichealth.ca. That's clinic@aliveholistic clinic. Oh my goodness. clinic@aliveHolisticHealth.ca. You can reach me there. They'll send it to me directly, my clinic manager. And you can always ask me a question about PGS testing. You can always consult me as well. I can do a phone consult if you're not in the Toronto area. And but check out the post also below with Dr. Gleicher. And let me see. I just want to check out to see if anybody's written a question. No. Okay. So back to a recap. Okay. So if you're going to contemplate doing PGS, the number one question is, are they doing PGS testing that is the newest form, new generation sequencing, NGS testing? That's the kind you want. Secondly, if you're going to do PGS, ask them if they're taking out the biopsy just before hatching, because that makes a difference. And because there is such a thing as self-correction. So the third point is that self-correction occurs just before the hatching stage. So that's why we say get the biopsy right then, because before then it will not be so accurate, because there's still possibilities of self-correction if there's genetic abnormalities. My point about, again, those live births that some of you have heard about or read about, it is due to mosaic embryos, where it's partially normal and partially genetically abnormal. What are my other points? Oh, yes, here's a very important one. So some people have non-tested embryos sitting in the freezer at a fertility clinic. And then the question is, do I go back and test them? Well, I say no. Because, and in fact, they asked the embryologists, that was a question posed, and typically we don't want to do that. Reason being is that you're taking the embryo that has been frozen, you have to thaw it out, biopsy, put it back in the freezer, and then if it's tested normal, then you thaw it out again before you put it back in the body. So just that process alone, what is the integrity of the embryo when you freeze, thaw again? Really? I mean, you got to think of that. And the other piece to the genetically normal tested embryo, well, what happens to the embryo when you take a little biopsy from it? Because it's basically a certain percentage of its overall cellular mass. Now, Dr. Casper believes that it does nothing. Like, he's so confident that taking a biopsy has no ill effects on the blastocyst that I'm almost convinced that it's okay. Not 100%, but almost. You hear that? And he is so cocky as to say that what we need to do is to actually not just do the biopsy on the outside, because the outside, as I mentioned, of the cell is the trophectoderm, the placenta cells. So it's not even the baby. He's saying that we should go in and grab the biopsy from the inner cell mass, which is actually part of the baby. So I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I like that, because that's part of the baby. Shouldn't it keep everything? But he's saying, no, it makes no difference, because the cellular proliferation is like this, right? So there's self-correction in that way. So I can buy into that. And the reason why I can kind of buy into that, I'm still having a little hard time, but I can kind of buy into this because years ago, we're talking like 20 years ago, I had a patient who was the only adult I've ever seen, and I've heard about this, about babies, they regenerate. Like, you hear about, worms. If you cut them in half, they'll regrow their other half of the tail, right? And then they can regenerate. Well, babies have that capacity up to about 2 years old. So this adult patient that I had, he told me that when he was a baby, somehow, and I don't remember the incident, his little pinky was cut off. So he was under 2, and I don't remember, he was an infant, so under 1, and yet I saw him in my clinic in the flesh, and he had a full-on perfect pinky. So that is regeneration to its fullest. So I guess I can buy into Dr. Casper's thought that if you biopsy a cell from its inner cell mass, meaning part of the baby, the potential of developing a whole baby is quite there because it's so early. So I can buy into that. But what I don't, again, I have more fear about is biopsying an embryo for testing when it's already frozen. So please don't do that if you're interested in like finding out your genetics. And then the very final piece back to, oh, wait, let's do this. So even with all of this info about PGS, the bottom line is, oh, wait, what is it? Yes, it comes down to personal choice of whether to do PGS testing or not. Yeah, it is. I think so. But again, I don't know if you caught this, but I showed earlier how at Trio, the fertility clinic in Toronto, they were looking at PGS tested versus non-PGS tested embryos that are put into the body. And there was only 4% increase in live births, right? So to me, it's a no-brainer. Like 4% is not anything. I'd rather risk a miscarriage than pay $5,000 for it. However, another woman will say, no, 4% makes a big difference. And guess what? A miscarriage is not benign. It can impact us and our body, both physically, emotionally, spiritually. Whew, right? Like if anybody's ever had a miscarriage, miscarriages are like hell. I've been there. It's a horrible feeling. So I know there are women out there that tells me, Mary, I cannot fathom another miscarriage. So to them, even that 4% increase of chance of live births is worth it. So it's an individual choice. So yes, thank you for bringing that to my attention. And I think that's it for now. So at one point, I think Dr. Casper has agreed to do an actual interview with me, but I was just so excited. I need to tell you guys about this now in my own words. So perhaps it'll come out better and more succinct when he talks about it. So I'll figure that out when that is. I don't know yet at this moment, but he has agreed to do it this post. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned a little something. Love you guys, and I really wish you well on your journey. And next week, we're going to do something much more lighthearted. I'm going to be interviewing Catherine Flynn, who wrote the cookbook. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. My mind is right now. I'll be interviewing her, and she's going to show us a live demo of something out of her fertility cookbook. So check that out. That's next Wednesday, I believe. Or is it? No, it's coming. It's coming. It might be next week, but I'm having short-term memory right now, so it's not happening. Either way, we'll talk to you very soon. Check it out next Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Be here, be square. Check out my videos below. Lots of information there. Check out my book, Pathways to Pregnancy. Check out my website, marywong.life. And again, if you need to reach out to me, please do so. And it's clinic@aliveholistic.health.ca. Thanks. Take care. Bye for now.